Now, I just want to ask a couple of questions briefly to you all individually, and then I want to sort of ask some bigger questions that I've pulled out myself whilst we get the questions in from the audience. Yasmina, truly inspirational story. You start talking and you make me feel positive. What was your trigger? And I think this is something for you all I'd like to know. What was your trigger to become involved in this project and become this role model that you are within the community?
Yes, I saw this program come along on social media, and I saw that the program was about playing sport with girls, and it seems like a lot of fun. To be honest, I didn't know that the program was about becoming a role model. We also worked on our mindset and goal setting. But when I discovered that it was as much about personal growth as it was about playing sports, I became even more into it. Yeah, that is what I think.
And it's do you get, so you've got 29 young people in the community at the moment. When someone joins the community, how do you make them, because it's hard, we all know that socializing is difficult. I also find it still difficult, but as a teenager, it can be quite hard. How do you welcome sort of new people into your community and make people feel comfortable?
Yes, you already said it. You have to make them feel comfortable so they can talk about themselves, and we ask questions like, what do you like to do? What are your goals? How do you think about life? So you feel comfortable to talk and to sport together.
Well, you're very comfortable on this platform, so butt in anytime you like.
Thank you.
Claudia, thank you for your absolute great introduction. You and Dev sort of alluded to, and I'm sure that Yasmina and Pedro concur, this whole conversation about being involved from sort of concept of policy and discussions through to completion, having that voice. You said talk to the young people, not about. And Dev, you used a different phrase, but sort of along the same lines. How do policymakers, the people in government, in organizations that we've got today, how do we change that? How do we change that conversation and bring young people into that? Hope that's not a tough one for you, Claudia.
Thanks, Sammy. I can maybe give an example of how the Co-Create project specifically is working with young people and involving them in the project, so building on Pedro's presentation. So I think one thing that we didn't allude to in the panel was actually how Co-Create has actually been working with youth across Europe to actually bring them into the conversation and actually to conceptualize obesity, and we really tried to conceptualize obesity as the outcome of numerous interacting factors, and we've started to ask young people, what do they perceive to be the drivers of this? So our colleagues at LSHTM have been doing, in the UK, have been doing a lot of systems mapping work. And this has really just come to show that youth don't actually, they see the bigger picture. They don't just see physical activity and diet as the main drivers of obesity. And from their perspective, other factors are actually getting in the way of them making the choices that they want to make. And I think we've seen this from both Yasmina's introduction as well. So lack of free time, pressures that are affecting their mental health. And I see this as a cycle of really interactive factors here that we can't really, can't dismiss. And I think it's bringing youth and policymakers into one room, which we do through a series of dialogue forums, has been really influential, because it shows policymakers that youth see these wider systemic issues. And then now what we're trying to do is to make these tools available and open access so that everyone can engage in such dialogues in the future.
Thank you, Claudia. Dev, I have to say, I do love your picture when you turned off your camera there. I did panic, but then I'm like, he's already outside Number 10, already advocating for the next project. We've got some questions coming through from the audience, which I'd like to just raise one. Thank you all for coming through. I'll try and get through as many as I can. We've also got, thank you, Sarah, adding some content. So use the chat, everybody, to share best practice, as Sarah said. If you're working on initiatives, it would be great to see. So guys, and I'll start, I think, with you, Dev. I'm going to ask this, but I'll ask you all individually. We've got a question here. What would be your suggestions? As we're talking about engaging with the government, and we'll talk about, decision makers, but also how do you engage with youth to talk about a subject that is as sensitive as obesity? Hugh Duplessis says, as we will want to reverse the trend, we also do not want to stigmatize any individuals nor behaviors while doing so, to avoid increasing an already existing stigmatization. So if I can ask you all, to have we think about that. Dev, starting with you just briefly, how do we tackle that? Because it is a very sensitive topic.
Firstly, I want to get started. I want to say I despise the word obesity. I think it has so much trauma, so much stigma behind it, and that's not the way we should handle this problem. It's children's health. Children's health is the term that I always go with. How this is such a massive issue. How do we get young people to care? How do we really act upon this? And the way that I like to go about it, and what Bite Back does, is we look at climate change. Look at climate change 5-10 years ago. Were young people really engaged? Were they really actively out there wanting to make a difference? No. But what's happened over the last 5-10 years is young people have been educated. They've been informed about the climate around them. They've been educated about big businesses taking advantage of the climate, how they themselves play an impact. And we like to replicate that and put it into children's health. So what we do is we educate young people and inform them and empower them. We tell them about how big businesses are manipulating them. They're manipulating their health. They're taking advantage. Big corporations with billions of pounds are using that to their advantage to manipulate young people. They are shaping a landscape, and that's the only type of landscape that you visibly see. You make them angry. You get young people and you show them the actual problem, and then you tell them how to act, and you give them a platform, and then they speak out, and then we come together en masse, and that's when politicians listen. And once you can actually educate and you inspire a young person, there's nothing stopping a policymaker on the other side not agreeing with that young person, because an informed and inspired and an educated young person can obliterate a politician sitting on the other side, because they know the facts, they're empowered, they know exactly what they're saying.
So we need to change some of the communication and how we talk to young people. Pedro, Dev's very passionate, saying obesity isn't the right word to be talking to young people about. It is about their overall health. From your perspective, you're based out in Portugal, you're building this declaration and the policy. Would you agree that we have to change language a bit to talk about this sensitive topic with young people?
Yes, because the problem is the way obesity word is seen. We associate obesity with certain amount of people. This person is obese. And I participated in a podcast organized by the World Obesity Federation, which I had the pleasure to talk with Claudia. And the one thing they said in every single episode was that in there they use the people's first language, which means you would have to say the one with obesity, with the disease, not the obese people. This way you wouldn't be associating it with a person in question, so you would be talking about the problem itself. So the problem with the stigmatization is that people associate it with bad habits from one individual and not with this whole system that we're trying to change.
Thank you. It seems a concurrent theme here. Claudia, you are nodding. Is this what's happening in terms of the language that you're representing the World Obesity Federation? Mm-hmm. How do we change this to engage more young people into this healthier lifestyle and long-term legacy of health?
I think we really need to shift the narrative from individual level interventions to sort of beyond that, and actually just increase awareness in both at the educational level at schools, which is really not the case at the moment. But increased awareness of both how to training around actually how to use imagery and language appropriately, but also the narrative, weight does not equal health, and body size does not equal health. And often, no matter, how I've been in rooms of patients living with obesity, and we never, Pedro alluded to very well about the use of language and never referring to an obese person. But I think we need to recognize that despite continued efforts to manage weight, often some people cannot really do so easily, and the roots of obesity are a lot deeper. There's access to care, mental health, even when you think about sleep and other comorbidities, you can't really, there's so many underlying structural drivers, and those are not the ones that receive the attention at the moment. And so I think we need to really focus on doing that. And for instance, mental health, I think, is a really good place to start working from my perspective on some of these issues, and raised by youth themselves that I've worked with.
We've gone through just Jill, thank you so much for your question. I will get to that. Keep those questions coming in. Let's talk about food. You all alluded to it in different ways, starting with Yasmina saying, the community is there. That's a lot of positivity there. You're being yourselves as that role model, but the moment you step out, the moment you step online, you're influenced by fast food, or maybe let's not call it fast food, but food choices that are not healthy. As I think Yasmina said, maybe Dev said, or maybe you all did, that, it's quite often the cheaper option. Now, I'm going to sort of play a little bit of devil's advocate. These organizations have been around for years, and as this problem has as well. These organizations have to also make money. They employ, thousands, if not, tens of thousands of people around the world. It's a big paradigm shift. What things can, I know, Dev, you're being the activist, talking about these big bad corporates, but they are big organizations that are bringing, the GDP of our countries, that help support our infrastructure. How do we sort of support changing this big influence on the streets, online, to a more positive conversation without putting a ton of people out of work? I know that the declaration is there. I'm going to start, first of all, with you, Dev, as you have been having these conversations.
Apologies, hard 2020. Forgot to turn off my mute. I think no one's talking about, no one wants big companies not to make a profit. We're not saying Nestle, Unilever, you can't go out and make a profit. You can't go out and sell products. That's not the thing. I think the argument, the conversation is around big companies have a massive responsibility. They are responsible for massive amounts of global consumption. And they also have a massive role in young people's lives. Therefore, they are also responsible for children's health. Big companies now have a bigger responsibility, and they should be more aware, and therefore they should advertise and target healthier choices and healthier products to young people. They should reformulate their products and make them more healthier. They should make healthier products more cheaper and more at the forefront, and shine a light on healthier products, which we aren't really seeing happening. If industry, like we've seen with climate change, we can come together and make drastic shifts without losing money and remaining profitable. We don't want to take people out of jobs. We want to make young people healthy. We want the next generation of young people to grow up healthy, strong. And big companies are heavily irresponsible. They need to understand the responsibility, and that can only happen when we come together and really look at positive ways of creating that change. So yeah, it's not about sacking people or getting people out of jobs, not making a profit. Shareholders are a massive thing, but I think it's about greater responsibility.
Yasmina, you were saying, you said, the difficulty, one of the biggest challenges in the community, in the favela community, is eating healthily. How do you as a group sort of have a conversation as the favela community about not looking, not thinking, not responding to these adverts or these unhealthy options? What tips do you give people in your community to turn and look at healthier food options?
of course, it is difficult to not get tempted by all these fast food caters, but you have to find that balance. Like today, I'm gonna eat healthy, and tomorrow is my cheat day, for example, and just talk with other people. Like, how do you? And always, not all every healthy meal is not as good as fast food meals. So you have to talk about each other. Maybe say for what do you like to eat and what how can you how do you say that? Like hoe doe je
Wat
dat
wil je
zeggen?
zeggen?
Zo van dat beide gewoon lekker zijn. Dat is ook niet hoe je het
Yeah,
zeggen.
it could both be.
It can both be delicious by just help each other to make it tempted for each other to just eat healthy food.
So it's actually sort of creating that social change as you as influencers. That's a really good way of doing that, and that's a really great learning for everybody else in our community. We've had a comment from Prince Pieter Christian. Thank you so much. Politicians cannot just be the solution, he says. Define strategies built on programs that are already successful. Politics can promote that or translate success into policies. He also says, you know, also recognize that schools, when kids prone to obesity, try to help in the early stages. He agrees that supermarkets play a big role in supporting healthy food and want to recognize that fast food is quite expensive. It's a big barrier for kids. That's in the Netherlands. That's an interesting point. Pedro, in terms of, you know, you're working on policy, and you say that young people look differently at creating policy than those who are the policymakers in government. Can you tell us what influence and why it is different?
So the school system and the entire systems that we live in today have changed a lot since today's politicians were our age. So in every single system, education, marketing, every system I talked about and the declaration talks about has changed a lot. So if we want to change today's problems, of course, we need to look at the people that are living in that situation, and the politics that are now in the government. They don't have the youth perspective. They don't eat at canteens. They are not. They don't see the targeted social media influencers and advertisement about unhealthy food. They are not in our places. So that's why I say, if we wanted to create a policy and policies that affect youth, we should involve youth, so we can create an accurate solution.
I'm going to ask you, it could be that one of you can please put your hand up if you know. Jill has, and Lydica, thank you for saying that. Do you know if there is, just give me a yes, no, and then we can connect you with Jill, the youth group that you work with in the United States, like Co-Create? Is there a similar organization over there? Do we know or not know? Claudia.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't know if there's a youth group per se, but we don't work with any actively, but Faith Newsom, who I worked with on the World Obesities podcast and who is my co-host, founded her own organization called Oceans Lifestyles, and she has had a very empowering personal journey living with obesity and she's truly inspirational. So I do encourage you to go and check out her work as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah's made a great comment, which I'd like to share with our audience. Sarah Hickey, who joined us at the beginning from Urban Health. Broadly, the question corporates should be asking themselves, Sarah says, and be held accountable for, is how to ensure their sales and profits come from nutritious foods rather than ones high in salt, fat, sugar, like Dev says. Lots of room for corporate innovation in this area. I think one role for politicians, Sarah says, is to make sure that laws and regulations support this effort, like Co-Create's call for taxes on high sugar products. I think you'd all give that a firm thumbs up in terms of initiatives that are going on. I know that we are ridiculously short of time, and we are going to continue this conversation after the webinar closes at past. So please do join us in Zoom. We're going to pop a link into the chat for after this session, where we can delve into some of these topics in a little bit more detail, face to face with our panelists. But I want to be able to give you all the floor. We have 100 people from a variety of different organizations. We know we've got 39% of our audience who haven't included, for one reason or another, we'll not judge them. They haven't had, and they haven't included young people's views and opinions in their strategies. I'd like to give you all the floor, and I'll do it in the same order as we started. So Yasmina, Claudia, Pedro and Dev, be conscious of time. Yasmina, if you had one thing that you'd like to say from your perspective, because this is what this is about, youth perspective, what should we as the people who are currently making the decisions, making the laws and the policies, what would you like to say to our audience in terms of changing and creating a better, healthier lifestyle for young people? Big question.
Yes, I think that the most important is that you have to ask the young people what they think about some subjects, and just to take them serious. If they talk about that, just listen, and then after that, that's it. You have to take it and listen to them. That's the most important thing I have to say.
Should I go next?
Yeah, go for it. I'm just giving you the nod, thinking you passed the baton so well last time. Just go for it, Claudia.
Perfect. I would just say that to make young people feel welcomed and make them feel like that what they're saying matters, and when they're talking about a specific problem, and that their opinions are worth the same as adults. So also making sure that we really, not just involve them for a one-time event, but do it meaningfully and recurringly, so that they follow the entire policy-making process and don't just sort of receive information on what they should be doing or the need to participate.
Pedro.
Yes. The thing I would like to highlight is that is to not be afraid of not knowing enough. When I joined the Co-Create and when I started working more and more about this issue, I always thought to myself, what am I doing here? Like, I've never studied this problem. My area of study has nothing to do with it. I study design, but after that, and after being encouraged and talking with other people, I understood that that's exactly what's necessary. People who are from completely different areas and completely different places to give their opinions and to give their insights and especially their experiences. So what I'd like to say is not to be afraid of not being enough, because if one policy could affect everybody, everybody should give their opinion.
Thank you, Pedro. And Dev, your final words.
I'm going to repeat again what I said at the start. And I said, nothing about us without us. Young people have lived experiences. Ask young people. They've been there. They're in a skewed food environment. They have lived experiences. I'll quickly give an example because I know we're short on time, and we'll go back to the consultation that the government announced when they were going. They wanted to learn more about how restrictions on junk food advertising would affect. So they did a consultation. The consultation, the questions around it were designed for academics. They were designed for industry experts. If you're in a junk food advertising ban aimed at young people, why not open the consultation to young people and design the questions around it? That's why organizations like Bite Back stepped up, and we wanted to make young people's voices heard. Let's have a shift. We need to, businesses need to shift, politicians need to shift. Let's hear young people's voices a lot more. I think Claudia's got her hand up.
I can see that. I'll thank you, Dev, so much for that. Claudia, just before we close.
Yeah, just one last comment from me. I think I would just urge policymakers and decision makers to actually look what young people have actually done to date. So now with the UN Food Systems Summit, for instance, which is coming upon us, there's the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign that was recently launched. I don't know if everyone has seen it, but essentially youth around the world and young leaders have come to advocate and to steer positive change for our world systems, and they're incredibly inspirational people. And I think they just need to see what's happening, what we're doing already, because often, yeah, that will act as motivation to continue talking to us and to involve us in their programs and etc.
100%, an absolutely great way to close out this session. Thank you to our audience.